Hey Karl, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good. How are you?
I'm really well. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to talk to you about retroactive public goods funding because public goods is something I feel has the potential to excite and connect so many people in Web3 and also bring in so many people. I feel like, we often talk about the financialization aspect of crypto with DeFi, things like that. But I mean, personally, I came in kind of in 2017 for a minute, but left. And I can say that over the last 6 months, what has really excited me the most is this public goods piece with Web3. And I think kind of the true vision of what is possible with Ethereum. So yeah, I wonder if we could start with kind of your journey in terms of the Ethereum Foundation and also kind of the path of creation for Optimism, and then we can kind of get into how that all plays out and how your thinking aligns with your journey.
Sounds great. I'm excited. So I'm Karl. I work on Optimism PBC, and I have been doing, I guess, decentralized peer-to-peer stuff since college. And then in around 2015, started getting really into Ethereum. And I was like, okay, this is, these videos on YouTube, DevCon 0, were just, the best. So I just wanted to learn everything I could. So I joined actually Consensus and worked there for a bit. And then the magic of the internet, I saw I went to conferences and saw these people that I would watch in YouTube videos in person. And then I ended up, traveling around with Vitalik and giving talks and basically like learning from him and Vlad and all of these incredible minds that brought, Ethereum to where it is today. And so I ended up kind of working at the Ethereum Foundation and doing a bunch of consensus protocol work and basically working on what is now ETH2. And then I got drawn into, I've always been very obsessed with this permissionless innovation and this permissionless development. And that's why I couldn't help myself. I wanted to dive into layer 2s because layer 2 is this amazing, Ethereum is a platform that allows people to permissionlessly innovate. And what is the most awesome permissionless innovation that I could think of? Well, it's scaling Ethereum itself, right? Scaling the actual technology so that it can be brought to more people and, impact the world at a much grander scale, because it's just not going to, make the impact in its current form. And so that's why I started working at Plasma Group, and then from Plasma Group going to, we all formed Optimism PBC, and Optimism PBC, it really brought together a lot of issues that I think are not commonly connected. So this issue of scaling and bringing Ethereum to the kind of general population, but then also being able to scale up the distribution and funding for public goods, that I think is the amazing thing that can be brought to the world. So anyway, Optimism PBC has just it took my passion for layer 2, passion for public goods, passion for open source software. It was just okay, now you can actually live it out. So it's been a dream.
Wow. I love that trifecta for you. And I think what's so amazing about Web3 and crypto is that I think that it's a really common occurrence for people to feel these different aspects of their personal and professional lives overlapping in such a really meaningful way. And so I wonder, just in terms of that journey with Plasma and then Optimism PBC, in terms of really executing on this vision and kind of securing funding or being able to be in a position to take action, what did that journey look like?
Wow. I think it looked like a lot of heartbreaks and setbacks and perseverance. It's like anything else where really you just have to keep doing it over and over again, and you develop the reputation for being someone who continues doing and continues persevering. And that's how our team got funding from people, and got funding from people as a public benefit corporation, right? So we got funding as a public benefit corporation to, in our charter, enshrine the fair access to open source software. So we basically said, we are going to build this thing, and this thing is going to help perpetuate this open source software past the kind of irrational exuberance of crypto, right? There's been this constant feeling that from 2016 through now, actually, there's been this feeling that everyone is still irrationally exuberant about the space, and there's just so much high hopes and high really dreams, and money is relatively easy to come by, right? People are able to get jobs working at building open source software, and that's just not something that's normal or to be taken for granted. When the job that I almost left was actually a traditional tech company, but I was working on open source software. I've been obsessed with open source software from day one, and it was hard to find a place to work on open source software and actually make money. So the journey of getting money, basically securing money, securing people, right, and the mind share and whatnot, to then using the kind of, I don't know, the optimism, you could say, of the crypto space. You kind of use that, and then you're okay, now we actually have to build a better world. And so how are we going to do that? Well, we need to actually continue the cycle past the, I don't care if you have a business model. I'll give you, money to do whatever you want. Even if you tell me that I'm, you're going to give away a bunch of money to fund open source. Okay, fine. I just that's just it's not sustainable, but it is a gift and amazing. But we can make it sustainable.
And I wonder, just before we kind of go down that track with the idea of a PBC, a public benefit corporation, just pulling that thread a bit more in terms of finding a job in tech that allows you to work on open source, and just your experience previously, before Ethereum, in terms of open source development and maintenance, being a maintainer, and just I would love some insight into what that is really like, because I feel as someone who is not a developer, I understand that it is important that there is billions of dollars of value contributed to society globally. But I think that the realities of what living that life is like, we don't have a lot of color around as consumers. And so I would love to just really know what the reality is, kind of the good and the bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reality is that when there is not a lot of money in things, then things get neglected. And people who really believe in those things and kind of work past the fact that there's no money in it, those people go through hard times. And so the classic story, and notably I was, I'm pretty young. I didn't go through the kind of earlier golden age of open source software in the, late 90s or whatever. But I kind of, was in the ecosystem where it's okay, it's kind of hard to find, jobs and work that is just open source software. And of course, building a bunch of things for various companies. Of course, they're going to default to private, closed source. But I was listening to and consuming a bunch of podcasts, actually. And I think that this has been a really democratizing platform, because that gave a voice to a bunch of open source developers that actually were living that, that lifestyle, and they could voice their, their concerns, their problems. So for instance, there's a podcast that, old podcast called Changelog, and they would talk about, oh, how are we going to fund open source software? And, Faraz is talking about Web3, his his WebTorrent project, and, various ways to fund open source. And everyone's talking about funding open source. And, as an open source developer, you're like, maintaining a massively important, set of software, and you're getting a bunch of people submitting pull requests, issues. Oh no, this is broken. And you're not getting paid for this thing. And clearly there's a mismatch in what, where the value is being transferred and the value that people have for the thing. Right. And that's like a fundamental mismatch that I think is really prevalent right now, and is really, really, this is our responsibility, in my opinion, as, crypto, to realign that value. If we create a new financial system, but we do not align what we believe in with what we value financially, that is going to be disastrous.
Yeah, I completely agree, and am so grateful that I feel like there are so many people in Web3 and drawn to Web3 and crypto that see this as a huge opportunity. I don't know if this is obviously most certainly a once in a lifetime opportunity, but I don't know if also in terms of the time span it goes beyond that as well. And so I just wonder, in terms of really communicating that value and doing a better job of aligning it, particularly from a consumer perspective, like what are some points that you would kind of use to communicate the value? It's funny because I just met someone who is a maintainer of a core piece of software that we use on the internet, and I was just explaining to a friend. They said, "Oh, is that a big deal?" I said, basically, like, no one would run anything on their laptop. Like, no one could run anything if this person didn't do their job, and it's open source software. I don't know how to explain it to you. Like, the internet might break. So, but how do you do it?
Yeah, so I think there's a real fundamental challenge to what we are talking about. I would definitely recommend a post by Vitalik, which is a kind of a primer on quadratic funding or quadratic voting or something like that, where he really clearly outlines this problem of misallocating resources to basically underfund public goods. So open source software is a classic example of a public good, because anyone who goes on GitHub, they can download the software, they can make use of it, they don't have to pay anyone. Me using the software doesn't keep you from using the software. It's kind of open, it's information, it's free, right? So this is it's a quintessential public good, and it's not the only public good. And so we should have our ambitions set for the moon and solve clean air and whatnot. But for now, open source software is very immediately relevant to our ecosystem and our space, and so it's clearly the first step. But essentially, the issue is that it's a lot harder to extract value from a system where anyone can make use of your thing and not pay you, right? That is just fundamentally, it's way easier for me to sell you an apple, because if you don't give me the money, I won't give you the apple. But if you can take the apple, it's like Wikipedia's banner. It's like, Wikipedia is being used by everyone, yet how many people are actually listening to that banner and donating? So there is this this fundamental challenge to supporting these software maintainers and supporting and incentivizing the progression and development of this software. And I think it's a governance problem. I think it's a kind of a collective governance problem that is yet unsolved, and definitely without question unsolved in our current kind of governance structures.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really enjoyed the ETH Global talk that you just did with Vitalik with the Starbucks. I think Vitalik was talking about a Starbucks coffee and explaining the difference between public and private. I thought there was a really, just like an Apple, a really great way to give it context. And I wonder, I think it's much easier to understand in terms of what is a public good when it comes to open source software explicitly. But does your personal definition of public goods change depending on the context, and kind of what mental models do you use to define what is a public good?
It's really tricky, and language is really tricky, is the reality, because you can kind of make this. it's kind of a more general sense. There's like things that can tell you it's a public good, but like, what is a cat really? I know it's a cat, but I don't really know it's a cat. We're all in a simulation anyway, so like, who knows? So like, but the kinds of things that I think I look for to understand whether or not is this a public good or is this not, it's whether or not it's something that kind of raises all the ships, and it's especially important to fund the things that raise all the ships that are currently being underfunded. So I'll give a very like a mathy answer, which is that I was chatting about this with folks at Uniswap actually, and they suggested that maybe the issue has to do with how much value is extracted by a thing, an organization, a project, and how much value is generated by that project. And so it's kind of about creating like a golden ratio where if there's a lot of value being extracted, then that's like definitely, that doesn't feel like a public good. Like for instance, Amazon, it's creating a lot of value. I absolutely love ordering and getting 1-day shipping. Fantastic. But it is also extracting a lot of value. And so that makes it like this private enterprise has no problem with like generating money. But something like an open source software project that is struggling to have one full-time developer and is being used by all of the internet, like the value to extraction ratio is just astronomically out of proportion. And so we need to kind of reduce that crazy ratio and actually give value to these people. And it kind of sounds funny because you're kind of like making it so that the dollars that we spend on these public goods, they're kind of like, currently we're spending $30,000 on a piece of software that holds up the whole internet. And so, that's like pretty good, bang for your buck, right? But I don't think we should think about it in that way. Instead, we should think about it like, let's actually give this person has been, operating out of the kindness of their heart in many cases. And so we have to support them. So it's kind of like, that's the like general sense. It's like, is this something that raises all boats? Is this something that is just disproportionately neglected with regards to its, value extraction? And is this something that everyone can, that it's hard to, I said it already, but the raises all boats is like actually a complex thing that is not black or white either, right? Like because right. For instance, writing an article is a great example of a public good, right? Because it's like non-excludable, anyone can read it, anyone can, whatever. But if that article is written in a language that I don't understand, it's like less of a public good, right? It's like less, the public is a lot smaller, right? So like there are actually these like weird barriers where you can create a public good that kind of raises all boats, but it kind of raises them in unequally. So it's going to be another challenge for us to like figure out how do we actually like broaden our notion of what the public is to kind of encapsulate as many people as possible.
Just as you're talking, I'm imagining like a map of like, say, the Earth zoomed out from like a Google Earth perspective with like many bays. And so like the boats in that particular bay are like one particular public. And I think there is like a lot of confusion in terms of talking about the publicness of something, whether we are talking about literally the entire ocean of the planet and whether that is the threshold that we need to get over for what is a public, is that level of public for a public good, or like is it enough to raise the tide in a single bay, and is that a public good? And that's really helpful. Thinking about it in terms of value and extraction. I literally wrote a piece because I went through a Gitcoin grants round and I was just trying to, I guess, like synthesize my experience, which was basically my first kind of exposure to quadratic funding and, different kind of mechanisms that we have available to us. And then also just say for this podcast and, writing posts, as you mentioned, what that looks like in terms of playing that public goods game. And so, yeah, the kind of matrix that I came up with in terms of deciding what a public good was value on one side and market failure on the other. And then there's literally just this huge space where something could be anywhere. Like you said, you're like, oh, it's definitely not binary. I don't even think it's a spectrum. Like I think it's I'm not mathematical enough to know, but like I think it's something much more complex than that. But I really think that this idea of extraction is very easy to understand, and I'm very grateful that that's how you explained it. And so, and then another thing, I wonder just how you mentioned that, even with Gitcoin grants and things like that, platforms that facilitate the funding of public goods, in a single grants round, or even across many grants rounds in a year, if a project was to raise $30,000 US dollars, that would surely be considered a win. Yet, when we look at those numbers compared to the salary of a junior dev in any Web3 project, and I'm just going to take this way far out, but like I think about salaries of executives at public companies. I think about like athletes and I don't know, people who are paid, influencers even, like on social media, who are paid a ridiculous amount of money. I just cannot compute the numbers. So I'd love to know how you think about it, because it really drives me insane.
Yes, it absolutely does drive me insane as well. Okay. In some sense, it's definitely a win. But another thing that Vitalik has said is that the market like behavior is really driven differently at different scales. So you observe different behavior at different scales. So like $30,000 is going to create some activity. It's going to incentivize some people to do, maybe like make a podcast that they otherwise wouldn't have made. But it's not going to kind of change the way that the average person lives their lives, right? That's just not enough money in terms of like the total pot, like the payouts that we are giving. It's just not enough money. This is not a high enough, large enough scale. And so this is actually why. Here's the secret is like, I love layer 2 and I love software and I love like mechanisms and all this stuff. But like, to me, this is really all a means to an end. And the end is create a like better life for myself and the ones around me, because I believe that my life can only be really improved if everyone else is doing well. And so like, that's really the end. And so I think that the way that we get there and the way that we actually give for instance, NBA player salary to someone who wrote an open source library, which is like totally like, it should be a thing. It should be a thing. The way that we get there is we actually have to take control of the value that we are generating in crypto. That's at least my thesis. So like, we, technically we can change the world in many ways and like, get existing institutions to do a better job and whatnot. But I do think that by far the lowest hanging fruit right now is to repurpose the value that is being transacted on the network, some amount of that, specifically the stuff that has to go somewhere. So this is why we've, talked about MEV, which is minor extractable value, but like really you could even simplify it and just say, it's just transaction fees. So transaction fees, what are they used for? Transaction fees are used to express, I'm a user and I want to get my transaction in before the next year is over, right? So I'll pay some money. And so that you cannot give the money back to the user one-to-one, because if the user pays some money and they expect that they're going to get it back, then they'll pay more money, because then they'll get back more money and it'll just go. And so it ends up just being either you spam the network, or if you have money, you can right. transact. So it doesn't work to give back transaction fees to users. Right. Then that begs the question, what do we do with transaction fees? So for Ethereum, we have introduced the IP 1559, which now burns essentially burns transaction fees or some number of them. And that money goes directly to ETH holders. I think this is great and a move in the right direction, but I don't think it is the end of the game. And so instead, what I am very hopeful for is that we will see that all of these layer 2 technologies, and of course Optimism is going to be doing this because obviously we want the world to be a better place, but I hope all of the layer 2s do this, where they use their transaction fees to fund public goods and fund open source software and fund the right that balance, because it's a lot of money. That is a solid chunk of chains, like
what sort of change are we talking about, Karl?
I mean, if we, oh man, I wish I had these. I mean, it's millions of dollars a day, like in transaction fees. And, and I'm talking more generally, like this is not necessarily state of affairs today, but it's definitely, many thousands of dollars a day. And so like, we're talking, we are about to, we've talked about, how do I say this? We released a blog post a while back, and there's updates coming. That's why I'm stumbling on my words. There's updates coming, which I cannot give full details on, but I'll hint at, where we are going to be, giving away the first round of basically transaction fees to fund public goods. And this is, we've said that we're going to fund all of our profits are going to fund public goods. And that is just like, that's basically just like this network is for us. And so it's funding us. That's basically what that really comes down to. But that amount of money that we are giving away is a solid amount of money for our first round. You know what I mean? Like right. When you capture the most core component of of the blockchain, which is these like transaction fees, when you repurpose that to actually fund public goods, that I think has a real potential to make an enormous change, absolutely enormous change. And I think users, we need to only, I want to make sure that when I'm using software that it is supporting values that I support, right? Like I don't want my transaction fees to go to, a black box that just like ends up I have no idea where it's going. I have no idea what it's doing with that. Like, I want to be supporting open source software. So it would be so cool if like the applications that I'm using every day in crypto like are actually creating those like NBA player salaries for the people who are producing NBA player value in the space.
Exactly. Yeah, well, that's really exciting. So I wonder now if we could get more insight into, because we know where this goes in terms of Optimism donating transaction fees, like profits from transaction fees to public goods. And so in terms of creating Optimism PBC, how did even that idea for an entity come about? Is that original? Was it already in existence? Is this kind of like, how did this experiment come to be?
So there are you asking specifically about public benefit corporation?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So public benefit corporations are a known thing. They are a legal entity that have a legally enforceable charter. I believe Kickstarter is an example of a public benefit corporation. There are a couple of them out there. Basically, it is a relatively new kind of entity, which is formed basically after we realized that corporations are kind of lame sometimes. And we needed like better restrictions to make sure that they're not just going to like, oh, next quarter we need to see more profits. Let's do horrible things to everyone, and to share this. So like this is definitely this was definitely a very intentional choice and like in line with where we see the space and the kind of like future of this like whole movement going.
Yeah. And so when it comes to raising funds for a PBC, how do you convince investors to come on board to fund something when you tell them that the charter says that we're going to donate our profits to public goods and they know that's money that would otherwise be going into their pocket?
Well, first off, I am not the necessarily the person who did all of the convincing, but I would say that it really the reality is that it is a moment in time which that is possible. And that is not something that is going to always be possible unless we change the way that people perceive value, or like what they perceive will be valuable. So we've talked, I mean, I'll tie this into retroactive public goods funding a little bit.
Okay.
So retroactive public goods funding is this idea that if you consistently fund public goods, you know, stuff that is like producing tons of value but is currently underfunded, if you consistently do this and you fund things that have already produced value, so you say, okay, let's look at the world, what is currently underfunded, let's give a bunch, you know, let's fund that, let's, you know, reward those people retroactively. So this, if you do this consistently, then there will be, you know, VCs, you know, random investors, etc., that start finding, well, and also developers, of course, like that's the most obvious. But the reason why I bring up the other two is because you'll see developers that say, oh, I can actually make a solid, you know, reward profit. I can get an exit. For having built really solid, really great open source software. And that means if the developer thinks that they can get a big exit, then, you know, maybe some investors also think they can get a big exit. And so then they invest in that developer and they say, hey, I'll pay for your, you know, room and board, and you build this thing, and then I'll get a cut or something along those lines. So like that's what I kind of mean by we're reshaping things that we value as a society. We believe that currently there is this pervading thought that because you do some positive impact in the world, it's going to be no profit. There's going to be no money in it, right?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Like,
why is that the correlation? Like, I don't know how we're meant to move forward.
Exactly. That is insane. That is literally us accepting our fate as having a terrible future. If we agree that that is the way, and we all believe that myth, that meme, that vibe, like that is going to be disastrous. So this, like the reality of like how we got funding, but also how we need to be perpetuating this funding, this way we got funding, is that people for a short period of time forgot that myth that if you make a positive impact in the world that you can't get any money. And so I will only invest in things that, you know, and I think that, you know, it's kudos to the, you know, to investors and whatnot, and kudos to all these people, and kudos to the early crypto, you know, community. And it's now our responsibility, now that we have this, like this, now that we've done this and we've felt this way and we've actually like kind of broken that, at least chipped away at that narrative, that maybe we can actually like bring that to more people and make that even, you know, get that to the next level, right? Like this concept of like, giving ownership of protocols to users, and this concept of like, you know, involving people in like this whole like Web3 thing and narrative and like why it's different. I think that there really is a fundamental and hopefully long-lasting shift in that we believe that that there is an alignment of value creation and value extraction.
Yeah, just when you're talking about kind of the impact of that, even just that one decision to fund Optimism PBC and how that plays out, I can already see the many ripples that and the impact on the ecosystem and kind of honestly broader humanity. And so it's really interesting just comparing that to a kind of a corporation or a company where those profits just essentially flow into like oceanside properties or, you know, do you know what I mean? Like I don't know really what good it does apart from like for a few people. And so I wonder, in terms of like this ecosystem and what you imagine, how does that look if, you know, say that all hopefully layer twos are taking at least some percentage of their profits and channeling it into funding public goods retroactively. What does that look like in a few months or in a few years?
That's a great question. So in the in the near term, it will look like, at least us starting to ramp up our, funding for really great open source software that, and wait, not just open source software, also, articles, documentation, videos, all of this should be rewarded. Like all of these things that are just like basically bringing us all up, like those things should be rewarded. So what that will hopefully look like in the near term, realistically speaking, what is going to happen is we're going to have to do a few, like you're lighting a fire and you like strike the flint and it like sparks a little bit, but it doesn't catch. And then you like strike it again and like sparks a little bit and you strike it again. And then finally it catches flame. That is what I'm hoping. Or you're revving up an engine. It's like that same thing.
Right.
Like that's what I'm hoping we'll see. So, and we'll end up seeing like, okay, great. Oh, exciting. A bunch of open source software, a bunch of, great community members and community contributions have been funded. Oh, hallelujah. And then, oh, maybe, maybe more. So, maybe that just like convinces a few people that this is like a good idea and they can actually like, be a part of this and, be a part of this movement. And then, it picks up steam. And eventually we get that whole like that crazy next level thing where just your average Joe investor is like thinking, I think that this is going to solve a really important world problem. I'm going to make so much money off of this. I'm so greedy, I'm going to solve global warming for my self-interest,
That would be so. It's really funny to think about because I wonder how much intention plays into all of this. So if there are investors who are looking for, still looking for that outsized return for the risk that they're taking of funding something early, and then maybe on the kind of other side of the spectrum, there are the devs, the developers who are very mission aligned and they're kind of ignoring all of the economic incentives to be very intent about the work that they do and the contribution that they make. Does that matter in terms of investors? Because it's quite strange, like thinking about the money. This is what gets me as well, is that I do think that money fixes things in this instance. Like I really do. And so I would love to know how you feel about, where that money comes from and the intention behind it. Does it matter?
Ooh, good question. I mean, I definitely think that generally things matter. I think it's really hard. Okay, here's how I'll answer this. I think that in general, intentions matter and collective intentions matter and like the cultural norms matter and where we're headed matters. So I do think that the thing that would be scary is essentially a culture of funding the a culture where bad intentions are normalized, if that makes sense. If it's one person who's like putting money into a charity and they're like, oh yeah, I just want to show my friends this, certificate that I got. Like, okay, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's like, okay, great. You still funded the charity. Like, you get your, your thing. I don't care. That's fine. It's more of this like collective, movement. If that collective movement is not well oriented or well directed or well like nurtured with the correct, mentality and memes and direction and vision, that's where it gets really scary, right? Like right now, the vision for like the internet and the vision for like us people is just so muddy. It's like unbelievably muddy, and it's like just a disaster basically. And so like we need some like collective visions that are next iteration. We don't need Iron Man did a lot for us. but there's some more that we can do. And so, hopefully that collective intentions are good. And I think that they are. And Vitalik gives a great example of, and actually I heard it in another podcast, to be honest, just recently, basically arguing that this like weird, really kind of sterile economics, economic analysis is just like very incorrect. So for instance, why do we hold the door for people that we don't know and we're never going to meet again? Like, what is that feeling as like a human being? Like, why do we do that? It's like, obviously if we, it costs us time. If we were these like really heartless people, right, then we wouldn't be holding the door. So like, I really do have faith that there are collective intentions that are good. And in fact, generally collective intentions are good. And one bad intention will not be too bad, but I'm okay. And then there's another, school of thought where it's like, okay, well, if you enable people to do terrible things, then, then they can genetically engineer a virus and murder us all. So like, okay, there is that, like, there's one bad intention there, and that's a little scary, but that's a whole different subject.
Yeah. I just like thinking about this idea of a collective consciousness. I really resonate with that. And I think that's one of the reasons I love being in this space so much, is that at the moment it's very kind of high signal in terms of the people that are here, that have found their way into the space. And so it feels to me like a utopia already. So I'm really grateful and excited by that. But I wonder, in terms of kind of spreading this vision that you and I clearly share of the future and how this plays out, do you think that the approach is to go kind of towards where the money is, so like to investors, in terms of that approach, or does that cultural norm get set like with consumers and users with memes, like from the ground up? Because there are trade-offs on both ends, and I wonder, like, if you had to choose where to focus energy, like in which group to focus energy on over the next, say, 6 months, like what do you think would be the most impactful?
That is such a hard question. Okay, sorry. No, don't be sorry. I can't give any other answer than humans, than like the masses, us. I can't give any other answer than that, realistically speaking. I really do believe that human beings as a whole have some solid amount of power right now. Like we're doing pretty, we still got it, we haven't lost it yet. We still got, there's still a little decentralization left in the broader society. And so I would say that if I could convince one group of people, it would absolutely be consumers. And the way that I think it's kind of the classic things, which are, vote with your dollar, like understand what these, what the things that you are using are actually, doing for you, and are they working for you, or are you their product, or are you their, customer? And, retain our dignity, basically, as a species, as a human, entity. So that would be like, that is definitely where my head goes, would be on the individual person level, and that investors and money will follow. I do think at the same time that it is impossible to create a movement without targeted memes for targeted folks. So like, you'll have the like crazy people, like the early crypto people, you need some of those to just be like, wow, the world is, the future is right. But then you'll also probably need the kind of like down to earth, oh, this thing makes, I like this app. This app is making me happy. And, oh yeah, great. My quality of life is slightly improved by this thing. Or like, this thing paid for my sandwich. That's amazing. Those, you'll need that kind of stuff. And you'll also need the investor, like the future is going in this collective, more conscious direction. And so we need to be ahead of the trend. It's just gonna, naturally it'll fracture. But if there was only one, then I would say we need the people.
Yeah, that's I think it's really interesting, just this idea of being human beings and individuals and having some sense of agency over our existence. Honestly, I feel like there are so many parts of life that we have kind of been I don't know, it's almost like we've been like pacified or sedated in a sense to not really know what we're involved in, to have any kind of knowledge about what is really going on behind the scenes. And so, for me personally, I feel like an example is like, what is money? I don't know what money was really before I was exposed to Bitcoin and Ethereum. And yeah, like this idea of public goods, it's like, I had no idea, that open source software was running the world. And I think this is really promising and exciting. And I wonder, in terms of like experiments that we can maybe do in kind of smaller communities and maybe even as individuals, like what sort of actions can we be taking to awaken people to the opportunity that we have right now in this moment?
That's a great question. I actually think that I'll get first the meta side of this is, I think that one of the most impactful ways to empower people is to give them tools and to give them things that allow them to see that more clearly. Like, and so we should be basically rewarding and investing in our ability to gain useful information, not just information that makes us upset or angry or whatever, like social media, but for like fulfilling but also hooked, like catchy learning. I want to get really engrossed in something that really makes me a better person. That would be so good. And so for like spreading the awareness, I think that it really comes down to, or at least, okay, one thing that it comes down to, other than like crafting great memes, like there's a million things that it could come down to, but like one thing that I think is very high leverage is creating kind of systems that people can use that are really user-friendly and really like catchy and great and engaging, that enrich people's lives. And so honestly, that can even come down to like this podcast, right? Like people listening to a podcast that is inspiring them to go do something. That's a part of the internet that now exists that will like potentially have a positive impact on people's lives. Like I will tell you right now, I've gotten a lot less value from scrolling through, I would say I've got a lot less value from scrolling through Twitter by a long shot than listening to podcasts. And so I'm addicted, realistically, but nonetheless, so all of that to say, I think the things that we could do are just kind of like content create, build tools that, promote good content, like, become the I don't know, the rock, the backbone of the internet, right? We will slowly but surely replace the existing systems with better systems.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think, I think of nutrition as well as like an analogy in terms of like, you don't realize that you're living on junk food, and then you stop having chips for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you like have something really wholesome and nutritious, and you're like, hold on, this is good, and I'm full, and it's great. Like, it's great for me.
Yep.
So yeah. I wonder, just in terms of maybe this idea, that taking that like junk food, health food analogy of like short-term and long-term incentives, and even just perspectives, because again, thinking about Ethereum, I basically hadn't thought, when I think about time, I think of it previously in respect to my lifetime. And now I think far more generationally, in terms of like my time scale that I'm thinking about now is generations at least. And so I wonder, in terms of like how you think about time, and if you ever had to change that model, or if you were just that was just kind of part of how you think.
Great question. I think that I operated without time for most for a solid chunk of my life, just kind of day to day operations. I really do think that this long-term mentality, there is something to it, and something very, very deep to it. And like, from the the long-term stock market, the Long Now Foundation, like there's a bunch of people and a bunch of like really interesting thought about like, what is this long-term perspective? My recent thought, I was like thinking about it, like if everyone had a long-term perspective, like would that solve everything? And I think if everyone did, then probably, but it doesn't solve everything immediately, because even if someone has the best of intentions, there are still governance problems that come about. So you can, if you're a benevolent dictator, but you just don't know what's going on in the streets, and you've really got great intentions, but you're like the actual information that you need to make the change that everyone will benefit from. Like, in your heart of hearts that like the best long-term outcome is everyone is feeling, is vibing on a real high level, but you don't know how to get there. And so like, I think it's going to be two things. I think it's going to be, we get that long-term kind of mind state shift. And we also develop governance systems that actually surface the needs of our needs as people.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. This is something that this kind of loops back to open source software, I think, which is that it's really easy to zoom out, and it's a lot more uncomfortable to zoom in and think that, wait, stop, this person needs to put food on their table, like they need shelter. I also wonder, just in terms of the way that open source software has been funded up until now, how it, and even potentially how it is currently funded in Web3, and this idea that it might be month to month or quarter to quarter, grant to grant. It creates like a lot of instability financially for people who I'm guessing could literally walk into any Web2 tech job that they wanted. And then that's just for people in that position, let alone people who want to work on open source software but say wouldn't have the luxury of job security if they so chose that path. So how do you think about kind of that trade-off in terms of financial security in open source?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge problem. It is, here's my guess. My guess is that it is not like a snap at your fingers and now there's like long-term funding, and it's like totally solved. I think that the actual root of the problem, that's like a symptom, but the disease is what we've been talking about, which is underfunding and undervaluing this as in general. Like if there is enough money that investors are down to invest because they can see like outsized returns on a really, really great project that's going to lift a lot of boats. If developers see that there are possibilities there, you can have organizations that literally that are essentially designed to just pay salaries for developers under the belief that they will eventually build some cool stuff and get retroactively public goods funded. So like everything, I had there was this moment where I was like, oh man, is retroactive public goods funding everything at all? Like all things, like should you replace all of the government with retroactive public goods funding? Like all like companies, all the things just recursively down. And then I was like, oh no, UBI, how would you do UBI and like retroactive public goods funding? It's like, oh, you can have like people build UBI systems, and then those UBI systems can get retroactively public goods funded if they're really successful. And I was like, oh man, damn it. That's another thing that retroactive public goods funding can do. Where does it stop? So at the end of the day, though, I think the reality of this like thought of like retroactive public goods funding is everything. Like really what it comes down to is like money is an incentive is like the dumbest version of that. You know, it's like you get what you pay for is another dumb version of that. So it's like, obviously totally. This is true.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to just witness Optimism PBC lead the way in this sense. And I'm so grateful to honestly be in this space when, people like you and Vitalik are kind of trying these things and putting these ideas out there. And then not only that, have the capabilities and skills to bring them to life and impact so many people. So thank you so much. And I can't wait. And hopefully, I can contribute in terms of, I think what really resonates with me is this realignment of value. And I think there's so much potential in that meme to really win hearts, minds, and wallets. I don't know if that's a thing. So yeah, thank you so much, Karl.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And you mentioned contribute. I just got to give a shout out, Optimism PBC, we are hiring. So, if you want to change the universe, you're doing some software development, especially, check out our jobs page. And what else is there? Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And let's spread the memes. It'll be fun because you're all in Optimism. We're all in Ethereum. It's like the boundaries are all made up. It's all fake.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Karl.
Thank you.